After Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Coral Reef, the US Navy didn't have the best reputation in the world, but they had one more chance to make amends, and that was at the Battle of Midway. Now, the Japanese wanted to conquer Midway as it was directly in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It gave them a base of operations, and it put the US in a worse state of affairs against Japan. So, the central force going towards Midway consists of 3 battleships and a group of light cruisers. The south consisted of the landing force, which was mainly light cruisers, and the north, which was the pride of it, which consisted of 4 aircraft carriers, holding a total of 250 planes. Now, the idea was bomb Midway, land on it, take it. But the Americans had deciphered the Japanese codes and were ready to spring a trap against the Japanese trap at Midway. Now, the US used 3 carriers. There was the USS Enterprise, the USS Hornet, and the USS Yorktown. So, on the 3rd of June, the day before the battle, the base was on high alert. They knew the Japs were coming, they just didn't know where and when. So, when the Japs' aircraft carriers were in range, they sent out their first bombing raid. But a US scout had spotted the invasion and got all the planes off the ground. They didn't want the planes dying on the ground, but the US Wildcats were no match against the Zero fighters, all of which died. All the planes that launched from Midway died in the ocean. And at 6:30, the airstrikes on Midway from the Japanese had begun. The US defended the island as best they could, but what could you do in an island in the Pacific? But the Japanese had realised that they destroyed all the Wildcat fighters, but they hadn't destroyed any of the bombers. So the bombers were above the aircraft carriers for the Japs, but the Zeros had already came in and destroyed them. Not one had hit their target. Now, the Japanese ships didn't anticipate for the US Navy, so they were equipped with the wrong weapons. They were equipped with anti-ship weapons, so they switched them out for anti-infantry weapons ready for the assault on Midway. Now, a Japanese scout plane spotted 10 US ships. This put the Japanese in complete disarray. They did not anticipate the US to bring a navy. Now, the Hornet crew were very, very unexperienced. Many of them hadn't many freight times, many of them hadn't even taken off from an aircraft carrier, many of them hadn't even seen it done, and many of them had never tried taking off with a torpedo, or a pickle as they called them. So, at 8:20, they heard that the US had 3 carriers, but there was a problem. The aircraft from the Midway assault were returning. Now, Chief in Command could have said, we'll launch the reserves and rearm the rest, or we can bring in all the fighters, rearm them all, could take an hour or so, and then launch them off in a massive strike. And that's what he did. Now, the Japanese scout plane got the position of the US Navy wrong. They were actually in range of striking distance. Now, the US sent fighters in to attack the Jap ships. 35 out of the 41 were killed. But what the Japanese didn't realise is that US dive bombers were already up above. The fighters had been distracted by the Wildcats, and the dive bombers were in position. 4 bombs hit the Koga, 1 hit the flagship, which was the Kogai, I don't know if I'm saying these right, and the Yorktown came in from a different direction. Its fighters came in from a complete different direction from the Japs expected. They were all confused, but they managed to take down the Soyu with 3 bombs. 3 of the Japanese carriers had been destroyed in 5 minutes, and the 4th, the Hiryo, remained untouched. Now, the Japanese fighters send out squadrons to attack a US carrier. It just so happened to be the Yorktown, which they had already thought they destroyed in the Battle of the Coral Sea. So, 7 made it to there after heavy flak fire, and 3 direct hits were scored. They ripped through the front deck and into the boilers. The crew managed to put them out and send the Yorktown going at 20 knots. Another group was sent to attack another US carrier, but instead it attacked the Yorktown again, and this time it destroyed it. It had been through the Coral Sea and 2 Japanese attacks at Midway. Now, the Japs believed they were at level playing field, with 1 US carrier against 1 Japanese carrier. But actually, the US had 2 carriers because they hit the Yorktown twice. So, for the next 90 minutes, they said the pilots can relax, get some food. They'd been up since dawn. This was the end to be. US dive bombers came in from the Enterprise and attacked the Hero. 4 bombs hit the deck, turning it into an inferno. And by the end of the inferno, the Hero was in a wreck. The Battle of Midway had been lost for the Japs, and they were now always on the retreat. Hence where the saying comes, before the Battle of Midway, the Japanese never stopped advancing. After the Battle of Midway, they never stopped retreating. So that is it for the Battle of Midway, the game-changing battle in the Pacific. All the Americans do now is advance, as we will discover in later battles. Let me know what you think on the Battle of Midway, and I will see you next week for one of the bloodiest conflicts in World War II and in history.